Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. This is going to be a little bit of a different episode. Oftentimes, we're talking about strategy inside of schools to grow your school, to iterate your business model, to generate new revenue streams. But sometimes you have to have a conversation of what happens when it's time for a school to sunset? Well, what happens when it's time for a school to close? And those aren't easy conversations by any stretch, but I think it's important to acknowledge them because every organization, every institution has a lifespan. And today I'm joined by Pauline Nagle. She's the former head of school at the New Morning School in Michigan, a real expert in leadership and independent school education. And she was part of the team that ultimately had to make the very difficult choice of closing the New Morning School. So I'm really grateful to Pauline for joining me on the pod today to talk about, that journey and what that looked like. And I know that this is, again, a conversation that's a little bit different, but I think it's equally important as any other that we've done on the podcast. So with that, Pauline, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the work you're doing with independent heads of schools and helping them out and getting them ready for the business and operations side of growing and leading their schools.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your story in a bit. But before we do that, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So, as Peter said, I'm Pauline Nagle, former head of school at New Morning School. I've been in education for 25 years, and I really had a pretty traditional path. I started as a teacher in a public school, moved into coaching and focusing on literacy programming, moved into being a principal at a public school, and then eventually a curriculum director. So all of those, ladder, stepping up that ladder. And then I had my own children. And of course, parenting starts to sometimes shift things. And for me, my oldest child is an exceptional learner, and I needed to look for something different for him. And so that's how I moved into looking at independent schools. And I was really pleased. I ended up sending him to the Roper School, a great school in Michigan that's for gifted learners. I was just really drawn to the philosophy centered on curiosity, empathy, whole child, which is what a lot of our independent schools do. And actually had an opportunity to teach there during the pandemic, and then eventually had that desire to go back to administration, and that's when I found New Morning School.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about the school and the leadership transition that you made into it. And I'm curious, when you first started the role, what were you hoping to build on in those early months?
Sure. Yeah. So New Morning School is the small niche school. It was a co-op school. So just very community based. Parents were involved deeply with supporting the school from a volunteer perspective. And it was small and had been around for 50 years. And the founder was transitioning, and that's where I stepped in. And so, as a lot of small independent schools are, the administration side was very lean. The first year I was there, I actually shadowed our founder, so it was her and I, and then a director of operations, and then basically we had our teaching staff. And so with a slim administration, you wear lots and lots of hats, right? And so, for me, my goals, in the early months were really to just get to know the school. There was a lot of conversation with the board about programming and identity. And so just really trying to think about how do we modernize the school programming and help get it on the map, was really some of the key thinking in that first year while I was there.
What were the market conditions like
Sure.
for the school?
So it was pretty interesting what we were finding, and this was, just right after the pandemic when everybody was coming back to school. We had a lot of families that were finding us that their children were neurodiverse, right? So some needs. And then we had really our competitor in that area was public schools. We have
Yeah.
some really strong public schools in the area. And then the other private schools in the area were mostly Catholic schools, so that we weren't really competing with other independent schools. So folks were coming to us because they really loved the philosophy. They wanted to be involved, and or they were looking for a place where their child could be seen and heard and supported in a smaller setting. And that was tricky sometimes to build up enrollment when your competition is also free.
Yeah. Yeah. Competing with free. I mean, that's becoming an increasing pressure for independent school. I mean, years ago, the thought was, well, we're competing against the other independent schools in our market. But now it really is. There's this wide spectrum of opportunities that families have, whether it's public schools, micro schools, online schools, homeschool. Like there's just all of these opportunities. So, when you look at it as a price continuum, you go from free to expensive, and then and now they're not only is it free and expensive, but there are a lot of like mid-range priced options as well. So it's super competitive.
Yes, yeah, the choices are endless almost at this point, and I think that's making it difficult to figure out your business model, and your finance model because it might not, and I've heard you talk about this a bit. It might not be contingent always just on tuition or just on tuition and the extra fundraiser, right? Like, what are the extra things that we can do to build in some revenue?
So, when did you realize that the morning schools model was under pressure, business model was under pressure, and what were some of the kind of maneuvers that you made in order to stabilize or reimagine it?
Yeah. So, a couple things. Pretty early on, I talked a little bit about programming. There was definitely a lot of voices and talk around, is our programming fitting our needs or is it serving who we want to serve? So really that was there was a piece around identity and trying to figure that out. We had some issues around retention from moving from our it was a pre-K through 8. So elementary programming to middle school, which is always, a transition point where you can have some trouble. So I really worked on looking at programming, looking at some of those retention challenges. And then what I kind of, when I started peeling things back, we really had no marketing plan. We had some outdated systems. So it was hard to gather data around, admissions and enrollment in the past. And then when I really dug into it financially, we really had no runway as well. So it was probably my first year there, I was in an associate role. And it was probably mid-year that I was starting to understand that. And then by the end of the year, really understanding that we had no runway. And so I was walking into my second year at the school was my first year as full head of school, and I was walking into it knowing that we pretty much had to have near perfect conditions to continue.
So, what were some of the things that you just, so you had that year to kind of assess, right, and understand the school, and then in year two, the keys were handed over to you. You're now the head of school. What were some of the things that you thought, okay, like these might be some levers that we can pull to stabilize stuff?
Yeah, so I kind of had a few tiers to think about. One was retention, right? There was, you know, what can we do to ensure retention because we need to keep everybody that we could.
Yeah.
And so digging into that, right? Like what were the friction points? And so we started working on some of those right away. One of them was just the co-op model itself was a little bit unclear. It kind of had grown over years and hadn't really been readjusted to, in essence, have clarity for parents to understand, like, I put in this much work and then here's the credits I get from tuition. It was a little bit muddy in essence. And so that was one piece, was just trying to understand and clarify that for parents and be really clear about, what people were giving and what we were offering. Um, and then I was working on systems, right? So again, just to make things easier, I didn't have a lot of data to pull. So we just started working on how do we build systems, right? Using that, SIS system in a way where we're just, very clear about getting information so that I could run reports and we could actually do analysis and so forth. So there was that piece. And then the other piece was looking at admissions. And we were just talking a lot about kind of growing from the bottom up, so that we can matriculate, kids through. Because once they entered our program, the history had been, at least particularly in like primary and they would stay through that 5th grade year, that was pretty solid. So those were the levers I was really looking at. And then just working with the board to help restructure some of their thinking, because coming from a founder to me, they were really working through a whole transition themselves and how they're operating. Um, and so, we built in a couple extra subcommittees, trying to get the board a little more active versus being a board that kind of just waits for reporting. And so that was also a shift that we worked on together. I really did have an amazing group of people, but those were some shifts we were working through.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure you made progress with each one of those things, but at what point did the board did you realize that the model was under stress? Like, what point did you like, okay, we have another conversation that we have to have here?
Yeah. Well, during my first full year as head, we were monitoring everything really closely, but it was also, that saying of like flying the ship while you're building it, right? It was that feeling where, because we didn't really have clear historical data, it was hard to know or predict what might be coming in the future from a, financial point of view. Um, so that first year, we kind of knew, again, if conditions don't kind of stay the same or we don't hit these other levers where we're building some enrollment, we're gonna be in some stress.
So when you realized that you were under some stress, how long did it take to make the decision? You know what, like we need to start having the conversation about potentially closing the school, or were there a series of things that you did before you got to that point?
Yeah, I think the school had always kind of operated with this level of, I don't want to say instability, but just this level of like, this is just how it is here. This is how our cash flow works. It just kind of works out. Some years we do a little better, some years less, but it's always really tight. And there was just kind of always this feeling that, as long as we kind of balance it out, it'll be fine. So the thought about closure came quite late into my second school year there. Um, because the school had been around for 50 years. Like, there's no way it would ever close. There just wasn't a belief that that could happen. Um, and I think the board and everyone involved just really always just kind of lived on like a hope and a prayer, and it would work out. So it took us quite a bit of time to figure out that we were headed in that direction.
So once you figured that out, what did that conversation at the board level look like?
Yeah. Well, it it kind of became a shock at first. So what happened was, as most of us have our intent to return cycle, right? You hit January and you start asking folks, is it going to be your intent to return? And we had never had issues with intent to return in our elementary programming. And those started coming back as undecideds. And that's when I knew if these come back as no's, we're in serious trouble.
Yeah.
So February we started talking about it. But it was, again, they were still sitting in that undecided pot, so we weren't quite sure. And then in March, the way our school functions is I actually have, we're really small, so I could do this, but I actually have individual meetings with each family because it's a co-op. So um, depending on how they engage, their tuition is variable. So I had to confirm all of that before I can know for sure. So by the end of March, most of those undecideds turned into no's. And that's when I went, I called our person that helps us with bookkeeping, and I called our president, and I said, I'm gonna do a projection, but this isn't looking good. And we did a projection, and by the end of March, beginning of April, we knew that we only had enough funds at that point, and commitment for the next year to make it through November of the following school year.
Yeah. So once you once you did that cash flow, that cash projection, what was the next thing that you did?
Yeah. Well, first, so I met with our executive committee, and we just started going through, like, what are the options, right?
Yeah.
Like angel donors, right? Like, who do we know that love New Morning that, could maybe help us get over this hump? That was like the first thing, and then it was, what else? What about bank loans? What about equity in the property? Like, what are all the actions? What about acquisition? Is there time for that? So we just went through, like, the list of, like, every possible scenario. Um, and, on my executive committee, I had a former banker. She was like the VP of, a couple banks. She had started a bank. So she really knew her stuff around financing. I had, folks that are CEOs of businesses in Detroit. So, some really supportive folks that really had, like, good ideas, around what to do next. And then we started walking through that. We went to our, our former donors or past donors, and talked to them about it. We didn't yet go to parents because we knew that would, create, a panic in essence, and we weren't ready to do that. We wanted to see, can we kind of figure this out?
Yeah.
The school's financial situation was such that our we still owed quite a bit on the property, so there wasn't much equity in the property anyway. So the banks weren't really ready to say, and here's another loan. So we just walked through all of it, and then that's when we finally got to the point where now we really have to talk about when is the time that we decide on closure. The interesting part about our past donors that had really just been, long supporters of the school. At this point, they were also talking about stability, how much they'd given, how it always feels like this. So there was a history that I wasn't necessarily fully aware of even until this point around that this had been the story, of the school just kind of always barely making it. And so there was a conversation around investment and when do donors when are they actually willing to continue to invest, and when they're not. And we were at that point too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of framing it. I mean, I I've been thinking more and more that like when a donor or family, a family pays tuition or a donor gives a gift, like they are implicitly making an investment in the institution. And so that's fascinating that that perspective came up during these conversations.
Yeah, I found that really fascinating too. I don't think I really had fully understood that until I've had these conversations where they they don't really see it as a one-time gift. they see it as a long-term investment, and that they want, they want to see their funds supporting something that's going to have a legacy in the future.
Yeah, very well said. Um, so you went through all the options, and I guess at the end of that list, you just realized that none of them were viable. Is that ultimately where you landed?
That was ultimately where we landed. And then there was the one big question mark was, well, what if there's a group or the whole school, or, a contingent group that really wanted to do a Save the School campaign. And so we spent some time, quite a bit of time talking about that. And then also went to staff, talked to them about it. We did have some conversations with parents about it to see, who is in it or who is out. But that's really a slippery slope also, because once you publicly share, we have to save our school, then you're really also admitting all the instability that's there financially. And you're going to have some folks that are like, we love the school we're in, but you're going to have a contingent of folks that are going to say, no way, I'm not investing. Again, it goes back to the investment. I'm not investing any more of my time and money into this organization because it needs saving. And so there was a lot of conversation around that. And when we went to staff, and we were just honest with them about it and said, this is where we are. How do you feel about it? They also had those feelings of just struggling with looking at long-term viability for themselves, right? And so all of those pieces together kept leading us further down the path of closure.
Was there like a general fatigue, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I had, and we all do. We have our kind of our pillar teachers, right? Like the teachers that really, they're just amazing. They support the program. The parents love them. They're the people that folks are coming back for. And it was my pillar teachers that were um expressing that fatigue.
Yeah. So, uh, all of these conversations, all of the lists of options in terms of trying to save the school ultimately came back and led you to the decision that it's time to it's time to close. It's been a great run. We love our school, but this is I think it's run its course. Is that ultimately where you? I mean, obviously it's where you landed, but is like that process took you to that point?
Yes, yes, it did. It did. Because the conversation started moving away from, we lost this much enrollment, we need this much money, to what is actually sustainable.
Yeah.
And not only are we talking about just making it, but we're talking about growing. And what does that actually mean? And what are the costs and needs for that? And that's when um we really landed on it. Again, amazing run. But the school just wasn't quite, I think, ready for that handoff to.
So, once the decision was made, what did the communication plan look like to support, all these different constituent groups, right? Faculty, staff, donors, parents, students. I mean, how did you approach that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it all happened very quickly. As I said, really it was May by the time we were really landing in this space of thinking about closure. And so we just kind of went from one group to the next. We started with staff, got their thoughts and opinions, but we're that helped us continue that thinking that we're moving towards closure. Then we had a town hall with parents uh, online, just so that everyone had the option to attend. And that was really difficult because that was, really being able to spend time being transparent. And to them, although we had been talking about it maybe for a month, at this point, to them, it was really the first they were hearing, you know, this information to this extent. And then, and then we ended up having a couple meetings after that. I allowed opportunity for people to spend more time with me if they wanted to really understand the why. That was the hard part, was having people understand the why.
Yeah.
There was that group of people that wanted to fight and save the school. So we, had conversations about, before we, really, before the board actually voted for dissolution, we worked through that with folks. Is it viable or not? And so that was kind of the next step. And then really within a week from that meeting, we, the board had made the final decision that we were going to move towards dissolution and move towards selling our property. And so we had a, typical end of year celebration plan, and we quickly, rounded the troops of amazing parents and staff, and we created an end of year celebration in
Yeah, I was
essence
going to
too.
ask. Yeah.
And then we thought about alumni after that. So we just kind of walked through that. By the after school had ended and we had really cleaned up the building in essence and preparing it for a sale, we had a alumni community walkthrough. So a reception. I mean, it really was kind of like a visitation funeral for the school in essence. It was, it was good closure.
Yeah.
Um, and, we gave folks the opportunity for that. And we, we're posting along the way on social media and, providing thanks to our founder and things like that too.
Yeah. None of this is easy, right? That's must be one of the hardest things you've ever done.
100%. I mean, honestly, it was brutal, I mean, just from an emotional standpoint. Um, just to walk through all of that, you don't walk into a school thinking you're going to close it, right? And unless that was what you were hired to do, that is not what you're thinking you're going to be doing. So, there's that. And so just kind of just the emotional side of it for myself, along with carrying, the emotional impact for everyone else and supporting them and working through that. So,
No, I can appreciate that. I mean, I can't get what a highly emotional time of your life to have to, manage this process and work through all the things that you work through. Like intellectually, like, okay, I kind of understand the pieces, but emotionally, that's an entirely different thing.
yeah. 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 It's really difficult and it's not something I would wish on anyone.
Um, I do want to ask though about once you made the decision. I mean, I imagine that kind of uh, set you on a new path of like all these different work streams that you had to do in order to close down the school. I mean, what did that look like?
Besides chaos, no. Yeah, there was just so many aspects that you have to think about. One is, we still had to have enough money to close. So if you think about closure, it's not just like, oh, the end of the school year happened, right? We still had, bills to pay. We still had furniture and books and, assets and all of those things. I had staff that were looking for new jobs. So supporting them in that process. I was writing letters of recommendation, just everything that you can, imagine. So, from a work stream point of view for us, and I don't think this is, the same for everyone, but for us, the biggest thing was we knew we had to put our property up for sale, because we had creditors. At one point we had, stopped paying certain bills, because we were trying to get through the end of the year and uh, not take in too much prepaid. Um, in that process, we had parents that we owed money to, so there was a lot of pieces there. So the building was a big piece of trying to get that ready to sell, and working with brokers and so forth. We obviously have an attorney, that's working through the wind-up process. There was very specific rules we had to work through from, our bylaws perspective, as well as the state's rules around dissolving a nonprofit. And we're still working through some of those things even now. Records was a big thing, just even getting like all the records compiled, the physical ones that we had compiled into one space, and then determining what you had to keep and what you don't need to keep and shred. And, so all of that took quite some time.
Wow. As you're thinking about ways to honor the community, because I imagine, the mission, the school may not be a day-to-day operation now, but it's still important to a lot of people. Like, how do you honor that mission moving forward?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of things. I mean, one was we were really trying to work hard to honor through the closure, right? And just make sure everybody had time to, you know, gather and be together and be supportive of one another through that. The other piece is, as we were thinking about the sale of the building, I mean, one was just to try to finish everything with integrity, right? Like, let's make everyone whole. Like, who do we, I mean, from a financial perspective, who do we owe money to? Let's make them whole. That's always been the board's focus. And then looking at, is there a way, hopefully, it was a give or take, we weren't sure, but is there a way that we can find a buyer that would continue the school's property in a way that supports kids and is supportive of the community, because New Morning had been, you know, a, a a pillar in the community for a long time. And so we were lucky, we were really lucky to be able to find an organization that works with children during the summer. They run summer camps, and they've been known in our community. So we've had partnerships with them in the past, and they were able to purchase our property and um, are, revamping it. So it's not a school exactly, but revamping it, and they will use it all summer long for their camps. And then they also are franchising, so they're using it for offices and so forth, and thinking about how else they can expand so they can support the community even more. So we feel fortunate that, it's not getting bulldozed and turned into townhouses, and it's instead gonna be connecting kids in a play-based way. And then I think lastly, as we, we're still in the process of dissolving, but as we finish that out, and it's part of our bylaws too, but if there is any funds left, then the board gets to determine another nonprofit that the, funds would go to. So just again, like looking at, how do we honor our mission and our values and support someone else.
Yeah. As we begin to wrap up, imagine, there's a head or a trustee that's listening to this and they're like, I am kind of concerned about the viability of our business model. Uh, sometimes what I've discovered through this work is that oftentimes when you realize you have a real existential threat to your business model, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
Right. But it's really hard. The hole's deep and it's tough to climb out. So, if you were talking to somebody and they were like, there's a couple signals here and there, what are the things that they should be doing? Like, what are the actions or questions that they should be asking so that, they can preemptively, solve for this and ensure, sustainability long term?
Yeah, I think it, had we had time. So I think time is a huge factor, right? So again, like you said, maybe we realize this a bit too late. So just making sure you're running those like projection models quite a bit down the road, or that you have enough runway so that when you run into trouble, a little bit of trouble, and you're dipping into your fund balance a little bit, that, those are going to start to be your signs. And then I think it's a matter of, really, again, maybe doing a really good market analysis, really good, going through your strategic plan with your board again, like really using those tools to be looking and saying, where is it that is we're struggling, and what do we need to adjust so that we can be sustainable? Whether that means it's right sizing, whether it means it's, you know, getting some transportation to another locale so we can, try and grab more kids, whatever it is, is it an identity issue, and or is it about development? Or, what are those pieces? So I think for heads, it really is, it's not just financial. It's like really understanding your data, really understanding your market, and understanding the landscape and maybe changes that might be occurring and impacting as well. One thing I didn't, bring up yet is we had another, just felt like another layer of things that happened all at once. But one was, our governor was really pushing universal preschool, which is amazing and it's a really great thing. But our neighboring district, which was really part of our market, built a huge early childhood center and added probably about 8 new classrooms. Well, that took a ton of our, prospective families kind of just right out the gate. And so that was just another layer of impact. So understanding those pieces, like, where they're coming from, how they're going to impact, and what are the districts and schools doing around you with it.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate how you just framed that, and what it brings to mind for me is every year doing a very in-depth SWOT analysis,
Yes.
right? They make that part of your annual routine. Maybe it's in the summer, maybe it's a board activity, maybe it's a leadership activity, maybe it's a combined activity, but never taking for granted your market conditions, I think, is a really healthy way of approaching strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if you're new walking into somewhere, into a school, it's really, again, like, yes, do those pieces, but really understanding where your starting point is. When I walked in, I really didn't understand that. I think I was so excited to be, this is my first head of school role, right? I'm just going to take it. And I made quite a few assumptions because it was a legacy school, 50 years,
Sure.
like, those.
Yeah. Pillar of the community, like all the things you mentioned, right?
Right, right. And it took me probably longer than it will the next time
Right.
to, ask the right questions and get really clear about my starting point.
Yeah. Pauline Nagle, thank you so much for sharing the story of New Morning School. I know it's still relatively fresh, but there's just so much for people to learn from this. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope that a few people can gather a few golden nuggets out of it. So
Yeah. And if anybody wants to follow up, like, what's the best way for them to do that? Should they find you on LinkedIn, message you there? Or what's the best? Yeah.
LinkedIn is great. I'm on there all the time. So
Perfect.
find me there, Pauline Nagle, and in Michigan, and I'll be happy to talk with you about the story or anything else.
Awesome. Again, Pauline Nagle, thank you again. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.